Have you ever walked past a bank in Runescape and thought to yourself, I wish somebody would rate and critique these in the order they came into the game? Well, guess what, friends? You're in luck because that's exactly what I'm going to be doing today. We are continuing our quest of rating and critiquing every bank in Runescape in the order it came into the game. Starting today with the 11th bank to come into the game, Ardoin South. Now, as we make our way to the Ardy South Bank, I think it is worth pointing out again that we will be rating these banks on a 5-point scale. These banks will be rated on aesthetic, space, safety and cleanliness, location, and finally uniqueness to complete the ASLU rating system. And here we are. We will begin by rating the Ardoin South Bank's aesthetic. Now, my first impression of the aesthetic of the Ardy South Bank is honestly a relatively positive one. It's got a nice narrow entryway and it leads to what I would view as a very modern looking floor that goes from a concrete looking floor to a very nicely patterned marble, I believe. The flooring here I think looks fantastic. Now, as for the walls, I was corrected last video, and to all who left a comment, thank you sincerely. I very much appreciate and I read all the comments. These walls are done in a Tudor style as opposed to what I referred to them last time as a ranch style. This Tudor style is very classic. It's very RuneScape, and I think that looks very well in contrast with the flooring. The windows here are lovely, with drawn curtains of several different shades. We have only one chair, standard, and the bank counters honestly look quite nice. Each of them individually roped off with desks used to fill in the space between the booths. It's functional, it's modern. I think it's a very pleasant aesthetic. Now, one desk does not extend to the floor while the other does. I'm not quite sure why that is. Appears one is a desk and maybe one's more of a table. And while I find this strange, I'm not extremely put off by this or bothered by this. We have two statues as well, one behind each of the ladders. Now, it would have been easy just to throw a couple of ladders down, right? With nothing else. So putting some classy busts on a column in front of a window to give it some nice natural light, in my opinion, deserves to be recognized. This is a very, very pleasant aesthetic to me. I would rate the aesthetic of the Ardy South Bank an 8.4. Now, as for the space, I actually love the space used at the counters, right? A bank this size doesn't need 5 or 6 or 7 bank counters. 3 counters, all roped off and spaced very well. A sizable area in the bank for the tellers. There's no unnecessary clutter. This is a very well-utilized space. However, we come to our two almost cubicle-looking areas with the ladders, right? When we go up, nothing. The second floor has a window, and perhaps the third floor is for fixing and setting the clocks outside. It's strange to me to have all this space and not utilize any of it, especially considering how much space these two areas take up. Now, even with that said, I would still rate this space an 8.0. As for the safety and cleanliness, this is another pristine bank, not a single thing out of place. Even the grass outside, which I didn't mention in the aesthetic portion, but I do find that a sizable yard outside very pleasant. I wish there was maybe a little more greenery other than just grass, but I think it looks very nice. However, it is incredibly odd to me to have the poll booth outside the bank in the yard. It feels like there should maybe be some supervision when casting a vote. I'm honestly very surprised that this booth hasn't been vandalized in some way. I personally would not feel safe using this poll booth. Also, on some worlds, this is happening. Now, I won't deduct a ton of points for this, as it isn't every world that this is happening, but the fact that any bank would tolerate this behavior is alarming nonetheless. 5.8. All right, now onto the location of the Ardy South Bank. I'm going to be short and rather blunt here. The location of this bank is absolutely abysmal. It is wedged between the gates of the Ardy Zoo. It's wedged in between the backs of all these other buildings. This honestly feels to me like they constructed this entire town and then a couple of months later went, oh shit, we forgot to put a bank here, and then threw it down right here. It appears close to the market, but it's not really. It appears close to the zoo, but it's not really. You can't really access the zoo or the market very well from this bank. It appears close to the docks or the shipyard, but it isn't. It actually isn't. Absolutely a disgustingly located bank. Abysmal. 2.4. And finally, onto the uniqueness of the Ardy South Bank. And again, I'm going to be rather quick here. This bank is not anything particularly special. The two connected towers The rather nice fenced-in front lawn and minimal bankers and bank counters are what stand out for me. None of that to me, however, is particularly unique. While I appreciate the aspects of those, it doesn't derive any particular uniqueness from them. This is a 4.9. So if we look at our ratings again, and we go ahead and average these scores out, this comes to an average score for the RD South Bank of 5.9. The lowest score we've given any bank thus far. Yikes. And now we don't have to go far for our next bank. Our next bank is the RD North Bank. This bank was the 12th bank to come into the game. And this bank came into the game on August 27th, 2002. A few months after the RD South Bank, which came into the game on the 30th of April 2002. So this was the second bank to come into the game in Ardoyne. And let's see how we feel about the aesthetic. Now, unsurprisingly, we have an incredibly similar aesthetic in this bank as we did for the South RD Bank. Most of the things I quite like, but to avoid repeating myself, I'll focus on a few of the key differences here. First, no towers on this bank, just a small thatched roof, with the bank itself being outlined by this rather nice iron rod fence, which I quite like. Now, once you make your way inside the bank, we have a small seating arrangement, which feels right for the size of the bank, although the chairs themselves are nothing to marvel at, right? We've got 3 bankers and 3 open bank booths. The poll booth has no flag, but a rather nice red tapestry over it compared to the green one at the South Bank, and I actually think this looks quite nice in this room. Overall, I would give the aesthetic of the RD North Bank a 7.8. Now moving on to the space of the RD North Bank. This is a noticeably smaller bank than the RD South Bank. However, I do like how these walls jut out ever so slightly. It really sections this room off quite well, in particular the seating area. Now the area for patrons is quite nice and open, but for the workers, not so much. However, similar to the South RD Bank, the 3 bankers feels like the right number to avoid it feeling truly crowded and cramped. I think it's a very appropriately spaced bank. I would give this an 8.0. Safety and cleanliness. No pickpocketing fiascos here, no poll booth outside. All we have is a clean, professional, well-run establishment. Now, the bank's neighbor to the north is a pack of wild red sheep, and to the south, a shirtless bearded man who keeps cages of pigeons in his backyard. But neither seem to threaten the safety of the patrons of this bank, so I will not deduct any points for that. This bank will actually get an 8.6 for safety and cleanliness. Location of the RD North Bank. There are actually many ways to enter the city of Ardoyne, but realistically, I'd say this city has about 5 main entrances. And I do love that this bank is directly next to one of those entrances. It is also extremely close to the Flying Horse Inn, a wonderful, quaint little pub housing 2 Pints, which is an S-tier NPC, by the way. And if you take a short walk south of the bank, it puts you near the center of the city. And along that walk, you're going to be passing flowers. You're going to be passing trees. You're going to be passing beautiful stained glass windows, all the while walking parallel to the beautiful River Doyne, the longest river in Gielinor. This is, in my opinion, a wonderfully located bank. I would give this a 9.2. Okay, now on to the uniqueness category. Now, I at first, probably like you, thought aside from a few of the things we already covered, that this bank had nothing particularly unique about it. However, this bank is the first bank we've encountered that has a designated door for the bankers to enter and exit. And that's not all. Upon clicking these back 2 tiles, you walk and immediately walk back. You click and it moves you back automatically. Why? I have no idea, but it's this kind of quirky shit that I absolutely love and live for. Even if other banks possess this trait, RD North was the first and the OG, and it deserves respect for that. I love this unique aspect of the bank. We also have, out of the 3 bankers, 2 bankers facing the complete opposite. I mean, they're completely turned around the other way. It's outwardly disrespectful, and I honestly love it. I think if you're gonna be disrespectful, just commit fully. That's very unique to me. It has to be appreciated. This gets an 8.9 for me. So in conclusion, as we tally up our ratings, The RD North Bank finishes with an average score of 8.5. I have to be honest, I am stunned by this score. Absolutely stunned. Now, our third and final bank that we will be rating today, it is the 13th bank to come into the game, and I actually had to make a new account to access this bank because the bank is the bank on Tutorial Island. This bank came into the game almost a month after the RD North Bank on September 24th, 2002. Now, as many of you may know, Tutorial Island is a place that once you leave, you cannot come back and access. So I did have to make a new account, obviously, like I said, for this. But you know, you learn something new every time, and I had actually just learned that the flag on the poll booth only shows when there is a poll active. I did not know that. Okay, we have arrived at the bank. There is a lot to cover, so let's get into it. The aesthetic of the Tutorial Island Bank. Now, from the outset, this appears to be a very large building with a clock at the top, which appears to also be a bit off-centered on the building, and a weather vane, which, in my opinion, is very, very nice. It's a nice piece on the top of one side. Now, moving to the inside, there are multiple windows here with a pleasant aesthetic. I would say they're very similar to the windows we've seen in the Ardoin banks. It's very clear there's a lot of nice natural light coming in, not just on the ground floor, but on each floor of the bank. We've got a classic checkered pattern floor and a long brown rug running vertically as you walk in, almost as a runner from the entrance to the bank booths. We'll touch more on that rug in a bit, but I do want to point out that I think this rug is better than nothing at all aesthetically. However, it's not extremely pleasing to the eye. And I think a reason for that is it does point out how the bank booths and the entrance to the bank are not symmetrical. As you can see, this rug runs symmetrically center with the entrance to the bank and ends positioned a little right of the bank counters. And that lack of symmetry throws me off a little bit in terms of aesthetic. I think that's a rather odd way to do that. We have two bankers and thereby two open bank booths separated by one closed booth. There are some standard scattered torches around, one table in this first room, and then we have a few notice boards around as well. I'm not blown away by the aesthetic of this room, but not necessarily underwhelmed either. I think there are, some positives and negatives thus far. Now, there are two separate rooms, one north and one west, that have multiple stories. The west room has a small brown rug in front of the door, as well as a standard wood table and chair, again with nice natural light right by it. I think this would actually be an ideal room to get some work done. Upstairs, we have what appears to be a very secure gated area with two chests and a very nice looking statue in the middle, which I do think looks quite nice. Now, the other room, the room to the north of the center of the bank, it is very, very odd to me. First, you have a small table and stool with a lantern on it. This room has 3 torches in it, so I'm actually not quite sure why you would need a lantern in here. Second, there's a desk that seems to barely fit in the corner. This would be, I think, a tight squeeze for anyone working here. But finally, and maybe most disturbing of all, the brown rug is not in front of the door. In fact, it's resting under a torch to the side of the door. Are people standing here, seemingly in the torch? I don't know. It's very odd. It's very odd. Now, the second story is very plain and standard with a table and chair, and then we move up to the third story, which contains yet another gated area with 2 chests and 6 windows, which feels excessive to say the least. The most aesthetically pleasing part of this bank is unquestionably the outside. Inside, however, it really does fall flat for me. I would have to rate the aesthetic of the Tutorial Island Bank a 6.2. Moving on to space for the Tutorial Island Bank. Now, for such a small bank in terms of staffing, there is a lot, and I mean a lot of space allocated to desk work. Not counting the account guides room, which I really don't consider part of the bank, there are a combined 5 desks or tables. 5. It feels excessive, and thereby I really do think a waste of space. This space could have been utilized a lot better. I will also say that I do like the 2 banker, 3 bank booth move here, right? Any more would have really crowded the space in here, I believe. So I think that's a very appropriate number for the bank size. I would have to rate the space of this bank a 6.8. Moving on to safety and cleanliness, this bank appears clean apart from our mystery rugs, right? Were they brown when they got these rugs? I'm honestly not sure, but I'm gonna have to give them the benefit of the doubt here. The flaming torch above the mat in the north room, that is a clear fire hazard. But the gated areas show that they take their security or their patrons' items very seriously, which is also appreciated. I think a lot of the pluses and minuses in this category kind of even each other out. I would have to rate this a 7.2. Now, as for the location, this bank is situated on the northeastern side of the island. It's, I believe, close enough to where you could possibly see some people mining or some happenings at the Wizard's Tower, which is nice. You know, on an island, sometimes you want that privacy and you want that isolation, but more often than not, it's nice to look out and get a glimpse of what may lie before you should you leave the island. I actually think this is the best real estate on this island, and the bank takes up more real estate than any other building here. With all of that said though, this bank is on an island, and that island is a little bit in the middle of nowhere. It's not its fault, but it does need to be explicitly pointed out, I believe. I would rate the location of this bank a very nice 8.0. Now for the final category of the day, we have the uniqueness of the Tutorial Island Bank. This bank is unique, I would say, for three main reasons. One, it's unbelievably oddly shaped. One of the strangest blueprints to a bank that I've ever seen. Two, I think it's relatively unique to have two completely separate secured areas for storing patrons' items. I think that that's a very unique aspect to this. However, most importantly, and third, very simply, this is the first bank any patron will encounter. Something that no other bank in Gielinor can profess. That is inherently unique to the bank, and therefore I would give the uniqueness of the Tutorial Island Bank an 8.8. Now again, if we take all of our scores from our ASLU system and average them out, we come to a very nice score of 7.4. All right, ladies and squirrels, that will conclude this week's session of critiquing RuneScape banks. If you liked the video, then, let the algorithm know about it. Otherwise, I hope you have a beautiful week, and I'm off to, I guess, finish Tutorial Island.